Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Good afternoon. This is the Long Island Report. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend, esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the county chair of the Suffolk County Republican Party, as well as the vice chair of the entire state Republican Party. And there's big political news, by the way, Jesse, in the state party. They have a new state chair. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be with all our listeners this morning. Yeah, early this week, at the beginning of the week, actually, on Monday, the New York State Republican Committee, all 62 chairs and state committee people gathered in Albany to elect a new chairman as a result of the resignation of Nick Langworthy, who was elected to Congress. And that chairman is, Suffolk County's own from West Hampton Beach, Ed Cox, who served as the chairman of this party from 2009 to 2019 for 10 years. And really is someone who can, as someone who supported him in my capacity as a regional downstate chair, vice chair, and the chairman of the Suffolk County Republican Committee with my good friend and partner, Joe Cairo, the chairman from Nassau County. Ed Cox is somebody that is, has experience, has been the state chair, has been successful in the state chair, has the ability to raise the resources needed. He can hit the ground running so that we can begin the process where the state committee can assist local elections. 2023 is all about local elections in our 62 counties, and specifically here in Suffolk County, we're electing a new county executive with Ed Romaine. And it's just the right move to put somebody with experience, someone who's trusted, someone who can hit the ground running, that could guide us for the next several months and maybe even possibly beyond.
Well, both of us know Ed Cox very well. I'm privileged to say that Ed and I are good friends, and we're colleagues on the Cats show on WABC, which is on Monday through Friday from 5 to 6 p.m. And Ed is in the studio with us at least a couple times a week. He's very smart, a wonderful lawyer, a lovely person, very gracious person. The Republican Party is lucky to have someone like him, not just as the face, but he understands the operations. He's universally well-liked and respected. And we're in a crisis situation in New York State. Of course, even though I'm the House Democrat, I'm very fearful, as I've discussed with you over the many times you and I have worked together on the show. I'm very fearful of one-party government, and it's very important that there's a countervailing voice, that there are checks and balances against one-party rule, particularly when that one party, the Democratic Party, seems to be captured by an extreme left-wing group, the Working Families Party, the Democratic Socialists, and they keep pushing the agenda more left, more left, more left. They engage in cultural wars. They believe in taxes and super regulation, and they don't let people live. They want to take over local zoning decisions by state law, which is absolutely ridiculous because you don't have local autonomy. Cities are not safe. The counties are not safe because of their so-called criminal justice reforms. So Ed Cox understands that, and he led the fight with former Congressman John Faso, as you know, Jesse, to fight against the illegal, unconstitutional action by the Democrats in the legislature to fix the legislative map, to pack the legislative map with only Democrats and exclude Republicans from fair chances of winning seats in the House, in the Senate, and the Assembly. And Ed led that charge with John Faso, and it was a great victory, and that's why you have a Democratic party that lost all those seats in the House, and that's why Kevin McCarthy is now Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. But for New York and the work that people like you and Joe Cairo did in Nassau, other people throughout the state, but under the leadership of Cox and Faso and fighting this fight in the courts, it never would have happened. What say you?
Absolutely. I mean, I do want to say thanks. I mean, he's been on our show before, but Nick Langworthy was a great leader over his 4-year tenure, and we're all happy that now he's fighting for America in New York, in Washington. But you put it right on the head. Originally, the Democrats, their gerrymandered maps had us winning maybe 4 congressional seats out of 26. Because Ed Cox took up this fight, led the legal program against it through the court system, and with John Faso doing the communications and such and the advocacy, we now ended up with 11 of 26 seats Republican here in the state of New York. And think about it. That's 4 Republicans from New York. First time that's happened, from Long Island. The first time that's happened since 1994. And we have strong candidates all up and down throughout the state. If not for New York, Nancy Pelosi would still be the Speaker of the House. And when I had the privilege to place the name of Ed Cox into nomination on Monday, I jokingly said that I recall when I was a staffer, I was the chief of staff to the 1st Congressional District Congressman back in 2001 to 2004, Felix Grucci, that my experience down there was that every congressman from all across the country used to view it, there's 49 states and New York. I know that based on what New York did, and because of the efforts of both Nick Langworthy, but of course on the redistricting by Ed Cox and John Faso, that all those Republican members of Congress throughout the country are saying, from all 49 states are saying, thank God for New York. Because if it wasn't for us, we would not have that razor-thin majority and have Kevin McCarthy as our Speaker.
And I think that's exactly right. People anticipated a red wave. It really was, as we've discussed before, a red trickle, and that's not good. It's not good for America. It's not good for New York. You need to have a strong 2-party system, checks and balances against the excesses of the other party, so people will move to the center and have common sense solutions to the real problems, not just the made-up cultural war problems. So let me shift gears with you, because it seems to me there are a number of big stories that have broken since the last time you and I had the opportunity to chat. Let me start off with the Iran-Saudi deal brokered by the Chinese. And to me, Jesse, and I want your thoughts on this, to me, this truly is a game changer. From my perspective, this is a political, a diplomatic, an economic, and national security disaster for the United States of America, and it was all unnecessary. It was brought to you by Joe Biden, who, in the words of Secretary of Defense Gates, he was never right on any decision he made in 40 years in terms of foreign policy, national security, and he continued that dismal record into the presidency. And we're paying the price for that. The balance of power, Jesse, has really shifted now. China is the player. They have the resources now. They've connected with Iran and the Saudis and with Russia. They have the minerals. They have the gas. They are in control. Strategically, they're moving in. And we're the odd man out. What say you?
You're absolutely right. This is China filling the vacuum created by America in the Middle East. The foreign policy by the Biden administration has failed. It's failed miserably. We saw it first in Afghanistan, and now we are feeling all those failures in different diplomatic and economic, relationship type of fronts. This is not a good deal. China is now utilizing its muscle. It's utilizing the vacuums left by America to exert itself as a global power. And they're doing it not just militarily, they're doing it diplomatically, they're doing it economically, they're doing it by forging alliances. Whether we want to say anything or not, Saudi Arabia was an ally, is an ally of the United States, but we've pulled back from them. We pulled back from the Middle East almost entirely. We botched the Afghanistan withdrawal. That has demonstrated that we don't have the wherewithal, we're not competent, and we're not going to stand by our allies. And that's what's giving China the opportunity. Just think of it. This is the second attempt, and in this case, it was successful, where China has brought peace proposals or tried to act as the diplomatic arbiter between two nations that have been at odds with each other. First was a proposal to bring peace in the Ukrainian war between the Ukrainian government and Russia. The Ukrainians rejected that because it was too Russian-centric. But here we have Saudi Arabia and Iran, who have for a long time not had diplomatic or shared ties at all. And it seems at this moment that China has been successful in playing the world of a global diplomatic power, which is not good for the United States, and it's not good for republics and democracies throughout this hemisphere.
That's exactly right. And look, it puts enormous pressure now on the state of Israel, because it was relying on the Abraham Accords. Even though the Saudis were not members of the Abraham Accords, there was a lot of talk that they would join. They do have quiet relationships, both militarily and diplomatically, though there's no real formal recognition between Israel and the Saudis. And that was a good check against the extremism of the state terrorist state of Iran. And you could always count on the fact that the United Arab Emirates and Jordan and Egypt and those areas and the Saudis were scared to death of an ascendant Iran. Now, if Israel needs to take out the nuclear weaponry and the bomb of Iran, was Saudi Arabia going to give them flyover rights? That's a real question. That's a real problem.
It is a real question and a real problem. And here's the issue that is a little bit concerning. We knew that there was at least there were reports that Iran and Saudi Arabia were engaging in some talks. I believe the arbiter and the vehicle they were using was Iraq in this. But China's involvement came out of the blue. And it is something that I wonder how much was discussed at the intelligence level, how much the United States knew, and if they did know it, when did they know it, and why didn't they act upon it? It's been my understanding that economically, Saudi Arabia is taking the position, don't make us choose between you and China. China buys a lot of our oil. But I do know that some of their aspirations are for the United States to help Saudi Arabia develop their civilian nuclear capabilities as a preset for normalizing relations with Israel. So there's a lot of different moves going on here. And the one thing that concerns me is that on the global stage, in a very important region of this country, the United States is being boxed out.
The Russians and Chinese are in, and the United States is totally marginalized.
Absolutely.
That's very, very scary. And it's part of the global domination agenda of the Chinese. The irony, of course, is that Putin, with his obsession about the Ukraine, is going to wake up one day, find out not only is he the junior partner of China, but he may be the puppet state. They may be the puppet state of China. Because China has a real agenda, and believe me, Russia is not going to be the top dog in that relationship. Now, you alluded to them trying to broker a deal between the Ukraine and Russia. I believe they're going to resurrect that effort. I think they're going to try to come in and make a deal that's worthwhile to the Chinese interests at the expense of Western civilization and the Western democracies. I think we have to worry about that next. By the way, before we break it at this point, I just want to raise this issue, and I want to discuss it with you going forward into the next segment. Governor DeSantis, who's generally done very well in terms of public perception as a very able, smart guy, has done a great job in Florida and making it a red state as opposed to the failures of the blue states. He said something just recently, yesterday, that's absolutely made my eyes bleed, my head explode, and I think he's dead wrong. And I think he's harmed himself politically, and he's undermined the efforts to support the Ukraine. He says that the Ukraine is not a vital American interest, and Senator Rubio, who understands these issues very, very well, and remember, he's the senior senator from the state of Florida, and I guess generally would get along with DeSantis, challenged DeSantis on that, and he said he was absolutely dead wrong. We're going to be taking a break. I'd like to get your thoughts on that in the next segment, Jesse, about DeSantis, what his prospects are for the presidential nomination. Has he hurt himself? I want to get your thoughts. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party. We'll be back in a little while. Please stay tuned for more interesting conversation.
Campfire season's back, and that means s'mores. But when you're at home treating yourself, take them over ice with Dunkin's S'mores Cold Brew Concentrate. And suddenly you're always treating yourself. The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be. Click or tap the banner to shop now.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report, and we're back with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. At the break, we started to talk about what I thought was a very surprising commentary by Governor DeSantis, who I've generally thought very well of when he was a congressman running for the governorship. John Casputese and I met with him and thought he was a very impressive gentleman. I think he's been a superb governor. He won re-election by a great landslide. He barely eked through the first election, but he did very, very well as governor, and he had a well-deserved re-election. And I thought he was becoming the credible alternative to Donald Trump for the Republican nomination. Remember, I'm the Democrat, so I'm on the outside looking in, and you're the Republican. But I think DeSantis hurt himself by making that comment that the Ukraine is not a vital United States interest. What do you say, Jesse?
Well, I think what he said is that, and we look at his entire statement, and he said that the objective of war should always be peace, and that he would not provide assistance that would require the deployment of American troops or enable Ukraine to engage in offensive operations beyond its borders. And I don't think that's inconsistent with some of what we've been saying with some of our Republican policymakers and so on and so forth. Perhaps maybe he could have used some better terms of language, better than calling it a territorial skirmish and such. But I think what's important is that, he is a naval veteran. He knows what war is. He is now an executive. He has also served in Congress. And I think that that's a unique perspective. What I also like about the Republican Party is that, unlike the Democratic Party, that if you don't agree lock, step, and barrel with everything that the Democratic leadership says or the woke agenda says, that you're ostracized and you're excluded. Politics and elections are a vehicle for ideas and solutions. And I think it's okay to have differing opinions on the table with this, because I think we all agree that if we allow Russia to barrel through Ukraine, that's going to be a problem. But also, we cannot forget that Ukraine was not this utopia before the incursion began, almost more than a year ago now. It was, fraught with corruption and government corruption at all its levels and such. And I do agree with this issue. If people are talking about regime changes, every time the United States has attempted to engage in regime changes, whether it be in Russia or a small country, it has failed. It has actually turned against the United States. And I do think that what he did say, and this I think every Republican and every elected official should be in agreement, because I know, speaking to residents here who wish that they had the $40 billion invested in our country, that the citizens are also entitled to know how the billions of U.S. tax dollars are being utilized in Ukraine. That is important, and that's one of the things that we should have. Far too many times we have, as a nation, provided enormous funding to countries to basically build to nation building. Iraq being one of the most recent examples, and that's a Republican and Democratic problem that occurred during the Iraq War. We need to have an accountability because we have been wasting dollars. Lots of these dollars go to the corrupt enterprises and then are used against the United States interests, both militarily, diplomatically, and of course economically.
Well, I think that's well said. I do think, though, that Russia has to be stopped from this aggression. And I disagree with the governor. This is not a territorial dispute. This is a grab for territory by one country. The Ukrainians didn't want the war. Putin's been gobbling up different pieces of Eastern Europe as much as he can. Georgia being one, Crimea being another. This latest incursion, another. Biden totally said the wrong thing. He said about a minor incursion, if you remember that expression, which is an open invitation to Putin. That was a signal to Putin that he could go in and grab what he could. I think that was a serious mistake on Biden's. It teaches you a lesson that lawyers try to abide by, but not necessarily always successfully. You know, words matter. The choice of terminology matters. You have to be very, very careful when you speak from a position of leadership or authority to choose the right words, because they can be taken out of context or they can be misinterpreted, and that's a problem. Whether misinterpreted intentionally or not intentionally, they can be misinterpreted. Let's switch, Jesse. I want to talk to you about
before we switch. When you speak about that, you're absolutely right, and I think you had referenced Senator Rubio earlier, a Cuban American senator, just like myself, except I'm not a senator. I'm a chairman, but one of my favorites that I enjoy as an elected official. But he did point out that foreign policy at times is more about nuance than it is about what is actually said. So I believe that as any candidate moves forward that has had the pleasure of or the opportunity, like a Senator Rubio and others, to deal with foreign policy on a regular basis, become briefed on these issues in real time, that nuance will come. Certainly, I don't believe that this statement, rejects him out of hand as a candidate for president.
No. I don't think so at all. I don't think so at all. And I think it's better to make the mistake earlier where he sees that he's going to get a response that's not positive from a good number of people. And I think he has to start thinking and educating himself about the issue and learn how to frame the issues in a more appropriate way. That's all. Mm-hmm. So, absolutely. Biden's budget proposal. Now, to me, it's bad economics. It's bad public policy. It's more taxes. It's more regulations. It's more wasteful political spending, for favored left-wing causes, like Green New Deal, which destroys our energy independence. And it increases our deficit and increases inflation. And I think this is a very, very bad proposal. And, if we're not technically in a recession, but I believe we are, but we're not technically in a recession, you do have runaway inflation. It's not under control. People can't afford to buy houses. They have to choose how they spend their hard-earned dollars in terms of what they're spending on. They're spending tutors for the kids, or they're spending for oatmeal. I mean, what say you about this budget proposal, which is, again, acting like throwing more trillions of deficit on the fire, which also increases inflation continually, and it creates a disincentive to entrepreneurship and self-reliance? What say you?
I believe that this is nothing more than the going back to the same old progressive, far left agenda and playbook. This is Biden once again playing to his base. Let's not forget that sometime in this year, he is going to have to announce whether he's going to be seeking re-election. I believe that a budget document can be considered a political document, because that's what it is, because it exerts political philosophy. And in this case, as you pointed out, the political philosophy of Joe Biden's 24 fiscal year budget is higher taxes, more regulation, strangling the entrepreneurial spirit and the capitalistic spirit of the small businesses throughout America, and again, giving free money to those that will help him in his political cause. It's wrong. I believe that it's not going to come to pass. I don't see the Republican Congress passing this. So it's kind of interesting to see where this is going to go. It does set forth, I will tell you, a showdown between the Republican House, the Democrat Senate, and the White House on how this is going to be objective. But I will tell you, Washington has a spending problem. It doesn't have a revenue problem. Trillions of dollars in new taxes that our taxpayers, our families are going to have to pay will go directly to higher costs, and we'll be paying double on these issues. So, it will be interesting to see how the Republicans respond to this. I'm eager that they are going to go to our principles of small government, small taxation, and unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit, the American exceptionalism of the American people, and right that ship. Because as everyone has said, no one can tell me that there's a spending problem in Washington or in Albany, or in this case, Hauppauge, where Democrats control the budgeting. It is a revenue issue. It's a spending problem, not a it's a spending problem, not a revenue problem.
Okay. Well, let's zero in on this Biden budget. We've talked about too many taxes, but what it is, it's an imposition of the left-wing agenda on a Green New Deal, diversity, equity, and inclusion, mandating these programs in the various agencies, which is just identity politics and favoritism based on race. There's 87,000 employees, the IRS agents, to go harass working class and middle class people, rather than putting that money, those 87,000 employees. How about having 87,000 people hired to protect our border, Jesse, since we're being attacked on the border? What about taking all this money rather than woke programs and putting it into the defense budget? Because if you study the numbers on the defense budget, we're under threat, as you and I have talked about, from this axis of evil, and there's not sufficient resources to go up against China, who are outmaneuvering us in terms of technology. Russia's beating us down with this new missile, the supersonic missile, which we really don't have a defense for, and we don't have the same kind of missile. So you need to spend money on defense. The money is not allocated to defense. The technical raise in it doesn't even keep up with inflation. So in fact, it's a step back on the defense budget, and that's a big deal. Now, let me talk to you about another problem. COVID. 3 years into the COVID situation, and we still don't know the truth. We're starting to get glimmers of it. One glimmer is people are starting to recognize it did come out of the lab and didn't come out of a wet market. There was person-to-person transmission. Masks didn't do very, very much. There are after effects of the COVID vaccines, well-intentioned though they may be. The fact that we funded, that it means the United States government, through Fauci, funded this gain-of-function research in a Chinese lab because it was prohibited in the United States. So they funded indirectly, which, of course, he denies, but he denied a lot of things over the course of the years, where he was the front person on this. And the most important thing to me, Jesse, is this. We need to know the truth about Wuhan. We need to know the truth about what really happened. Did they knowingly create this thing as an act of war, or was it just criminally negligent, and they took advantage of it by allowing their population to travel all around the world to destroy different countries? 7 million or 8 million people died because of this, over 1 million in the United States. This is serious stuff. And what have we learned about this so that we can deal effectively and realistically in a medically scientific, valid way to protect our populations? What say you?
I think that what this has demonstrated, and let's sit it on the table and let's balance it out here a little bit by saying, you know what, we were dealing with a crisis of epic proportions that had never been faced in the last 100 years. So there were going to be mistakes. The mistakes that were doubled down upon is when the federal government, opposed differing views from both the sciences and the doctors and the medical community that were opposed to what the main narrative was. And that was the problem. The woke agenda of saying that we could no longer call the Wuhan virus COVID-19, the Wuhan virus, when it has been tradition that wherever the virus began, that was where it was called. We've had it for tens of hundreds of years that way. That's how it has been going on. So what happened here was it allowed for government overreach, the overreach of big tech, and the cooperation with the mass media to make sure that one narrative, just one narrative, was the one that was acceptable, that allowed to move forward. It wasn't that differing voices or differing analysis from other medical experts or those in the sciences were allowed to be spoken. In fact, they were ostracized, and that was wrong. That's where we had the initial problem that caused this shutdown that we're still dealing with 2 years after the fact. The fact of the matter is we were too quick to jump, and we were not nimble enough, or we were not capable enough because the administration and those sounding the alarms with a differing point of view or differing courses of action were drowned out. And that was a mistake. Unfortunately, I would like to say that I would wish I could say with more confidence that this would only have happened in a presidential year. But what we have seen is that this will occur on any incident, on any situation where the left believes it can take political gain. It is wrong. I mean, I will tell you that it is Fauci. If there's a crime that needs to be investigated here, it is Fauci and the way he went about. He has been smug. He has been arrogant. He has been propped up by those not in the places of authority like the mass media and big tech, but basically, I guess they own it. As the savior of the republic when it comes to COVID. In fact, his policies and his actions were ones that hurt our economy, hurt the development of our kids in classrooms, and hurt our society and led to initial divisions. How many times did we catch Fauci saying one thing at 1 hour on a news program, only to say the exact opposite later on in a different news interview? He got wrapped up in his celebrity. He got wrapped up in the fact that he was being named in the same circles as Oprah and others, and that hurt our country.
And don't forget, and we have to take a break after this point, but don't forget, Jesse, that he also was responsible for commissioning a report that said that there was no basis for the lab theory that it emanated out of the lab, but it really came out of the wet market. And then, of course, he denied that he had anything to do with that. In fact, it was his self-serving report that he put together. All right, we're going to take a break. This is the Long Island Report with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Jesse, when we come back, what I want to talk to you about is this crisis now with the banks and get your thoughts on that issue. So we'll be taking a break. Please stay tuned. This is the Long Island Report. We'll be back in just a moment.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for a light and fit remix. Like a crunchy storm of graham cookies, caramel pearls, and dark chocolate, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 light and fit remix varieties with craveable flavors and up to 120 calories and 10 grams of protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See remixyogurt.com.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report. We're back. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse, so all of a sudden we seem to have this problem with the banks. And this is a serious problem because, in my opinion, it shows a couple of things. You know, there was that former mayor of Chicago who, when he was congressman and chief of staff at the White House, used to say, never waste a crisis. It's always an opportunity. So it seems to me this is an opportunity for the big banks to get more of the market share and to undercut the regional banks. And anybody who knows anything about the economics of small business knows regional banks are very important. So that's one. So it's a net gain for the banks, the big national banks, as opposed to the regionals, and hurts local businesses. Also, it gives an opportunity for more regulation and more control by national government to federalize control over the banking industry. That's a real problem. But the most interesting thing about this is when you examine what happened out in the Silicon Valley, a funny thing happened. Who were they investing in? They were investing in all these woke, green energy, ridiculous propositions that were fantasies, that they were investing where there was no balance sheets that made sense, no market plan or business plan that made sense. They were throwing a lot of good money into companies that they weren't supporting with intelligence and foresight and wisdom, but only by wishful thinking. It was nonsense, and that was one of the reasons they ran into trouble. And as you and I have talked about, that kind of investing in woke programs at the expense of common sense, risk aversion, and protection is a real issue, because they're trying to do this now with the Department of Labor regs, Jesse, which will let the people off the hook, the investment counselors off the hook for investing in these Green New Deal fantasies and increasing risk to the pensioners and also getting less of an economic return, when that's a breach of fiduciary duty. What say you about this banking crisis?
You're absolutely right. They were investing in these woke industries that are speculative. And also, they were investing in cryptocurrency, which we've seen in recent months over the last, from the tail end of last year to this year, has been collapsing under its own weight because it's not fake. It's almost like a Ponzi scheme. But also, the real problem is, they could not lend out because they were investing in ultra-safe U.S. Treasury securities. That's fine. Except the problem is that the rapid increase in interest rates in 2022 and 2023 caused the values of those securities to plunge. So you can see how it's a multitude of negligence and ineptitude on multiple fronts. Here you have a woke agenda being driven now on an economic course, with saying you must invest in these untested, unscientific green energy programs. You're taking your financial security into danger by going into the cryptocurrency and relying so much on that. And then you have the feds that are hurting very safe, secure Treasury securities because their interest rates have been going through the roof. This is a bad policy on multiple fronts that are hurting, not only banks, but they're hurting the consumers, and they're drawing out the scare of the American people and the confidence in their banking institutions. I mean, just recently, over 2 days later, the third largest bank collapse occurred with Signature Bank here in New York. These banks are being bailed out because of bad policies. But what you just pointed out, the Biden administration and Democratic administrations throughout the state are pushing lenders and the financial community, the financial institutions, into forcing them to invest and require monies in these very speculative green energy initiatives.
You know what this is like, Jesse? You remember the crisis in 2008 where
yes, sir.
The stock market crashed? And you know what that was a result of? Something that was foisted by the Democratic Party on the banks, the so-called Community Reinvestment Act. And there are great articles and great books on this subject by Peter Wallison, who was Vice President Rockefeller and Governor Rockefeller's counsel, who I knew as a much younger man when I was younger and he was younger. And Peter wrote this book. And the lesson was very, very clear. When you get into these public policies that have ideological agendas and don't make common sense, which is give everybody the money to buy a house, and then you wonder when they can't pay the mortgage, what happens? Everything comes crashing down. The securities underlying them come crashing down. There's a cost to everyone. So all this feel-good legislation this idealistic legislation that is not bottom on economic reality comes with a real consequence, not just to the individuals who are impacted, but to the whole society, to the whole economy, and to our national security. Because again, if you don't have a strong economy, Jesse, you can't have strong national security. And this is a real problem. So Peter Wallison, when he wrote his articles and his books about the 2008 crash because of the Community Reinvestment Act, all these woke policies on green energy and getting the Labor Department effort to get investment managers off the hook by investing in this and mandating that that's one of the things they should be looking at when they're making investments, the banks, it's just ridiculous. It's a danger. And when it repeats itself, people will say, oh, my God, how did that happen? Well, it's happening because you're doing the same thing all over again. And as George Santayana famously said, if you forget history, you're doomed to repeat the errors of the past. Now, let me tell you that's something that's really troubling to me. And you're hearing nothing about it. All of a sudden, it disappeared from the front pages and from the news channels, whether radio or television. You had 4 Americans who went into Mexico, whatever their purpose was. They say their purpose was for medical care. Other people are trying to discredit that, saying, well, they're just trying to buy some narcotics. I have no idea why they were there. What I do know is they were kidnapped. 2 were killed and tortured and killed, and 2 came back grievously wounded. And a funny thing happened on the way to a crisis between Mexico and the United States, Jesse. All of a sudden, the cartel delivered 5 men to the streets bound and said, here they are. They're guilty. These are the perps. We apologize, the cartel said. This was unauthorized. Imagine cartels apologizing. How about apologizing for over 100,000 people who were killed by fentanyl? How was that for an apology? What say you?
Absolutely. I think what we don't need is an apology. We need is justice. We need strength. We need to protect our borders. This is my heart aches for these 4 victims in this case. It just demonstrates the failure of Biden's policies, especially when it comes to the border, where hundreds of thousands of families, there is not one corner of this country or one corner of our communities that has not been affected by the tragic deaths of fentanyl. How this administration cannot react to this, I don't understand. And it must be a problem when the cartel itself, serves up 5 of its own because they know something went too far. But the problem is, it's what you just said. The mass media, big tech, they just want to wash this under the table. They want to wash everything under the table, let the next news cycle go forward so they can forget the constant tragedy that is going on in the southern border. Sex trafficking, human trafficking, the trafficking of drugs, the trafficking of possible terrorists, unfettered access to this country that is a national security issue in every street and block of our nation. Because as you pointed out, every state, every community is now a border town because of the rapid increase of illegal immigration that's moving in here. And with that, it's carrying fentanyl, drugs, it's carrying human trafficking, it's permeating with sex trafficking, and it's allowing those who want to do ill to our country access without being checked.
This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. We'll be back in a moment for our final segment of the Long Island Report. Please stay tuned.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report. We're back for our final segment. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse, this awful incident occurred, and it wasn't an isolated incident. It occurred at Stanford Law School, one of the preeminent law schools in the United States. And this has occurred in Georgetown Law School, another preeminent law school, and Yale Law School, another preeminent law school. And this is what happens. A conservative speaker comes to speak, and the left-wing mob howls them down, heckles them, won't let them speak. And instead of having an administration that backs the speaker and says, you have a right to be heard, we will enforce that right. We will not allow a mob to shout you down, to shut you down. You know, Justice Thurgood Marshall of the United States Supreme Court famously said, Jesse, the two components to freedom of speech under the First Amendment. One is the freedom to speak. The second, Jesse, is the freedom to hear. And what these people are doing by their censorship is denying the second important component, the freedom of people to hear a diverse point of view. If you want to have diversity, you should have diversity of thought, Jesse. And I think this is outrageous. And the question becomes, what can you do about this to police these students, to punish these students, to get them back in line, to say that this culture of censorship and harassment of ideological, political points of view that you don't like has to be stopped. Because to talk about, you know, the left throws the term fascist around a lot, but the people who used to shout down and intimidate their opponents, that came from the right, and that came out of Nazi Germany. What say you, Jesse?
Are you really surprised, Your Honor? I mean, really, are we surprised? We know that it comes down from leadership, the leadership of that law department, that law school, that university. You know, it's amazing that, you know, we are taught talked to about tolerance only about issues that are important and are loved by the left. If you have a different opinion, well, then we have to shout you down, and we have to censor you, and we have to not hear different points of view. That's how we become informed, by hearing, by speaking, by debating different points of view, and that's how we progress. But no, not in academia anymore. The woke left has taken them over. They've taken them over, academia from the leadership down to into the lecture hall. And for them, if you do not agree with me, you are not to be heard, because I believe they're fearful, Your Honor. I believe that they're fearful that if 1, 10, 20, a large majority of those students heard that justice, regardless of his political persuasion, they may have found a commonality with him. They may have taken away a nugget that would shape their mind and their perspectives in the career they're choosing to be as officers of the court. And the leaders of that educational institution, that law school, don't want that to happen. They only want a new group of officers of courts, future lawyers, to believe in how they believe, how they see the world, not in how the laws should be fairly interpreted and fairly meted out. Transparency, fairly, through justice and rule of law. No, for them, it's about the rule of mob. It's the rule of emotion, and it's the rule of activism as opposed to being an academic, informed, fair, transparent.
Well, I think that's right. I'm very troubled by that because I take great pride in my profession, and I believe that lawyers have always been at the vanguard of civil rights and civil liberties and protecting due process. Talking about due process, Jesse, the January 6th riots, which the left calls an insurrection. It wasn't an insurrection. It was rioting by some, certainly not by all. It was not instigated by Trump. I mean, he could have acted a little bit better in a lot of regards, but he didn't ask those people to go there. In fact, his remarks were, "Is go there peacefully," and the record's clear. And they edited that out in a lot of presentation. They also edited out this January 6th committee, which was nothing but a kangaroo court. They had a predetermined agenda, a narrative that they just wanted to show that everybody on the center right were fascists, were insurrectionists, were bad people. That means that all people who voted for Donald Trump must all be bad by indirection. That's what they're trying to say. That's the narrative. In fact, the tapes show that were released by Speaker McCarthy and put out by Tucker Carlson on Fox shows large numbers of the people just acting peacefully, respectfully, and were being escorted through the Capitol, and the doors were open by Capitol Police. So it wasn't as crazy as they said. And by the way, no one was killed in that other than a protester who didn't have a gun, wasn't armed, wasn't threatening anybody. And she was killed by a Capitol Police person, and you hear nothing about that. That's totally disregarded. Her life doesn't count. Her life doesn't count at all. The policeman was given a medal for doing what? Killing a woman who wasn't a physical threat to anyone? I mean, it's an awful situation. But you had 1,000 people who were thrown into jail, still in jail, without any bail. And there they sit all this time later. And these tapes could have shown that they weren't involved in something and that they were entitled to this. And under a very famous case in the United States Supreme Court called Brady versus United States, they're entitled to so-called exculpatory material, and that was denied them. So here you have a situation where the tapes are controlled by the January 6th committee, the Democrats who ran that committee, one-sidedly. They didn't release the tapes. They spun the tapes the way they wanted to. They got some Hollywood producers and film editors to put it together for a narrative. You didn't get the full story, and these people are entitled to that, and that may well be a reason to throw out some of these indictments and some of these convictions. What say you, Jesse?
I think we all agree that there were a lot of mistakes made on January 6th, and there's a lot of responsibility that can be meted out that was not met. I think no one has clean hands here. I believe the president could have acted a little bit quicker once the riot and the demonstration was getting out of hand. I believe that the Capitol Hill police should have heeded the warnings that they were receiving. I believe that the Speaker of the House should have engaged the National Guard and requested it as it was recommended and suggested before January 6th. There's a lot of blame to go around here. But I also do say that, there was a proposal for an independent commission to, almost like 9/11, to investigate what transpired. I believe the president, who was initially in favor of it, in fact, he may have even suggested it in some of his comments, was wrong when he pulled back in support of that, because what transpired, what we're hearing now with these tapes that were never seen, there's boondoggle of a committee, the placement of anti-Republican, anti-Trump, as I said, Republican members of the House on that select committee by the Speaker of the House. She rejected members of that committee that was forwarded by the minority, which was unprecedented.
I agree.
That's what led to this issue. That's what led to this issue. If we had a 9/11
a truly independent commission without a political agenda.
Exactly. I believe that the roiling that this country has gone through over the last 2 years would have been not as severe. There would have been more trust, and I believe could have been a unifying factor. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. There's going to be skeptics. There's going to be concerns on everyone's part. But when you see these tapes that are released now and that were never seen before, you know what it was. It was a political committee with one political purpose, that is to tear down anyone that's a Republican or anyone who supported Donald Trump or voted for Donald Trump. That's wrong. I also think it was wrong of what the conduct of the people who went upon and rioted at that Capitol. That's wrong. But we don't do that. That's not what America is about. But let's lay blame where it lies, where it truly lies. It lies in the inactions of the Speaker of the House, the Capitol Hill Police, and the president could have done something a little bit quicker, could have acted sooner to try and ratchet down the situation. And then after those mistakes were made, it should have been an independent commission like 9/11 that reviewed and investigated the actions of January 6th.
Absolutely correct, Jesse. I couldn't agree with you more. Well, we have to sign off. This has been the Long Island Report with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. We look forward to chatting with you again next week. I hope you and your family stay well. On behalf of Jesse and myself, take care and God bless this great country. Thank you.